Alright, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about making transitions with acrylic paint and then also how to render form. So rendering is that practice of applying light and dark to make the appearance of 3D volume. So for this part of the practice, I'm asking that you pick one of these three activities. So the first one is this worksheet right here, and there's a variety of different forms on here. And you would pick 4 of them to paint right on top of the grayscale image. And what you're trying to do is to use that mapping of light and dark and copy it in either a monochromatic color scheme or just a black, white, gray value scale. So that's one. Number 2 is to do half of each of these. So half of the rows, half of the still life, you decide which half, and you could also decide how you want to divide it in half. That's up to you. This is a little bit more complex than this one, but you might find it a little bit more interesting. The third one is actually to draw from life. So you could take mannequins here in the room, set them up in different poses, and then draw them to make a composition. Once you're done drawing, you're going to look at the mannequins in front of you with dramatic lighting and then paint them. So this is just an example. It's actually a photocopy of another painting, but if I started with a line drawing, then I would add either a monochromatic color scheme on top or another black, white, and gray painting. So if you've never ever in your life before done a transition with acrylic paint or tempera paint, that's what I would start with, just in the border of one of these papers. So you can see what I've done here, that I've already started to paint, but let's say I'm going to do my example on this sheet. So like I said, if I've never ever done a transition before, what I'm going to do is just in the border, I'm going to practice that. So acrylic paint, the best way to get these transitions to work for you is to go ahead and pre-mix values. So you see I have white, I have black, my color is this red-violet, and what I've done is I have 2 tints of that red-violet over here, and then I have a shade of red-violet over here. So those are all ready to go. Before I'm ready to start painting, I have it ready. So the best way to go about this is to actually start from your lightest values. So again, white is going to be my lightest value, and the idea with blending or transitions is that I have to have wet paint on my paper in order to make it work, and I have to do the blending on the paper. So I'm going to start with white. That's my lightest value. I'm going to take my next value, which is this really pale pink, and I'm going to set it right next down to the white, and you see I just wiped off my brush, and I'm going to try to get it to blend. As long as it's wet, it should blend. I might want to go back and forth. You can decide at this point, and you can try. Do you like textural, which means you can see the mark, or do you like really nice and smooth? So I had to work that a little bit in order for it to blend. Then I'm going to move into the next value, which is this darker. Again, I have to lay it back on top or brush it back on top of the lighter value. If it's not blending on the paper, then I'm going to grab some of that lighter value, and I really want to gently work it back and forth. It's not magic. It takes a lot of time. I just wiped off my brush, and I'm going to use the paint that is on the paper there. As long as it's wet still, I can use it to blend. So I'm going to move into just a darker value. So you might want to attempt these transitions out here on the edge before you even start on one of these value paintings. But that's generally how I would work. I can't just put white next to my color and expect them to blend together because they're just too different. So if I put white down here and I put my color right down here, it will, I mean, it's starting to blend, but I'm not going to get that really gradual fading. It's going to kind of take over. but you can certainly try. I mean, you figure out what works for you. What I found works for me is that if I have these values already mixed up, and then the other thing is to have quite a bit of paint so it doesn't dry on you, but you don't want too much paint that you don't see or that you have one color take over. So that's the general idea of transitions. I kind of did those two different ways. What I'm doing over here is I'm matching the values. So like I said, I want to start with my lightest values first and then work into the darker ones. The only time I really rinse out my brush is if I don't want to have my white and black mixed together. And I'll kind of show you. Sometimes it's not really that important. So right here, I don't want you to do any outlining. What I'm doing is I'm going to use the contrast of the picture to divide the spaces for me. So I have white, that's my lightest value, I'm painting right on top of it. Then instead of a gray, I don't have a gray, I have this next light value. So I'm going to lay that down right next to it, and I'm making that just like the picture underneath, I'm making it fade. Again, if you want this smooth with no brush strokes in it, you can do that. If you want it textural, you can do that. So then it's getting a little darker. It doesn't get very, very dark. So I really don't want to get into my shades when I do this. The way that I'm painting right now is my layers are pretty thin, or my paint is pretty thin, and it's drying pretty quickly. But I'm gonna, the nice thing about acrylic is that if it dries too quickly, if it didn't fade like I wanted it to, I could go back and add another layer to cover it up, or I could even just glaze part of it. So I'm pretty much done right there. I've done my gradual transition. I'm gonna move to this little area right here. So what I want to be careful of is contrast. So if there is that light edge of the petal, the end of the petal, and it's next to a dark area, or darker, it's all relative, that I'm matching those values. Sometimes I increase the contrast of the photo so that it will work with my artwork. So really quickly, I wiped off my brush in order to get into the white, and now I'm going to try to get it to blend. I am using a brush stroke, kind of a one-directional brush stroke. I can switch. The nice thing about shading to make it look more sophisticated when you do this rendering is to go in an unpredictable direction. So maybe I might naturally start off side to side, but I want to go back in a different direction, let's say up and down, so that it's not as predictable. So that's my second spot. And that one I increased the contrast from what was really there. I'm going to go in and do these because these look like they're all black, but they're not all black. I don't know if you can see it on the video, that there are actually fading in there. So I am going to start with black. I'm not going to use a lot of just pure black. I am going to use that dark shade that I'd already mixed up. And then I see a lighter kind of streak in there, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in. That's not really much of a transition. There's another light streak over here. And that's okay. Sometimes there are not gradual transitions, but a lot of these worksheets and these images are. As I'm painting this, I'm going to kind of take a moment. If you're wondering why I picked these images, I don't like flowers, I don't like fish. The reason I picked these, and you can look for your own images if you want to paint on top of, is that they have a very clear and dramatic value structure. So I can see the lights, I can see the mediums, I can see the darks, and they're not very confusing. If I see a light value, then I'm going to use my light. If I see a dark, I'm going to use my shades. So next in here, I think I'm going to let that dry a little bit before, because I don't want that to fade into. That is a crisp edge, it's not a transition. So I'm going to work over here. Notice I'm not working in really big brush strokes. I'm using smaller brush strokes to do the work. And I have to come back to those overlapping areas to make them fade into each other. If my paint dries on the paper, then it's not going to fade. I'm not wasting time, like the drying time and mixing up values. They're already there. I'm spending my time blending or rendering on the paper. So I want you to be able to figure out, how do I make something look three-dimensional? I want you to figure out, do I like to have a smooth painting, or do I like to have something as more textural? So follow those values that you see underneath. I went over my line. I just kind of didn't pay attention. So here I've done these two examples. This one is more of a smooth technique. That one is more of a textural. It's really up to you. So if you're going to do this one, choose 4. If you're going to do this one, just do half of each. I do want to make sure that you have these spaces that touch each other and you're able to create contrast but not have outlines. And if you're going to do this one, start with a drawing of mannequins and then follow the value structure. You might want to take a picture with dramatic lighting, so I have small lights for you to use, or you can use a light on your camera. So have fun, enjoy. Do practice just gradual transitions first on the side to see if you can do that before attempting to do it on those worksheets. Good luck!